So democracy means rule of the people. Oligarchy means rule of the few. And the Greeks, the Athenians, developed a democracy, but it was very prone to demagoguery and passions, and they knew this. Plato had a very negative view of democracy because he said it inevitably decays into tyranny because the people are easily swayed by a demagogue who comes in, promises to solve all their problems. So democracy has generally been very unstable in human history. It's emerged at various points around the world, but it tends to be fairly unstable compared to many other forms. And the founding fathers of the United States knew this, and James Madison in particular, was really, really concerned about faction. That is, groups of people who are united by a passion or an interest and who are easily inflamed to turn against other groups or minority groups, and to act in ways that are bad for the whole, but good for that group. And so Federalist 10, the 10th essay of the Federalist Papers, is a brilliant meditation on how faction spreads, how anger in groups spreads and destroys democracy. But if we set up a well-governed, a well-set-up republic, we can contain the fires. We can dampen them down. And he said, one advantage of having a really big country is that the fire's not going to spread. Like, you can have an eruption over here, but it's not going to, trigger outrage 1,000 miles away. It'll take so long for the news to get there. So the Constitution, the Founding Fathers created a system that could deal with the human tendency to faction, and it was assuming vast-size, slow-distance, slow transmission of information, and a variety of political innovations to cool things off. Delay, slow things down, big distances, things can cool, the fire doesn't spread. Well, social media changes all of that. Now the fire can spread instantly from here to there, it can spread everywhere, and things happen so fast. So I think a lot of the founders' assumptions about society, as they were crafting this elaborate mechanism to deal with human nature as it is, they were based on assumptions that are now invalidated by our hyperconnection. And it's not just the hyperconnection, it's the hyperconnection with constant moral grandstanding, with displaying to others. So, the best scenario is that the problems of democracy now are just the normal growing pains. Every transformative technology does good things, does bad things. It's used by bad actors. So, it's quite possible that we'll all figure out how to handle this, and this is a period in which democracies seem to are declining in quality, and maybe we'll come out of it. But it's also possible that we'll see a lot of democracies fail, including that of the United States.
And that comes with the behavior of the political candidates themselves, and also the way they interact with voters, and then their own reactions therefore, and then the votes.
Yeah, that's right. So one thing I've learned from meeting members of Congress and talking to people in Washington is that most of them are really good people. They're smart, they're public-spirited, they came to Washington not to light fires, but to make the country better, to solve problems. So this is something true throughout our discussion here, is that most people are basically well-intentioned. We don't get very far if we demonize people and say it's the bad people are causing the problem against the good people. It's citizens who have complicated natures, are put in new situations with new forces that are leading to really weird and bad outcomes. So I was speaking to some congressmen last March, and one thing that they told me is that if they, because I was asking a lot about how much do you talk to people in the other party, how much do you work with them, because by all reports that's declined a lot since the 1990s. And they said, well, now if you do anything that departs from the party line, if you reach out, if you break ranks, you're going to be crucified on social media, which has big effects for your funding and your donor base. And there are a lot of organizations that are policing this on the right and the left, so that if you deviate, they'll publicize your treason. So social media, so democracy is predicated on a somewhat informed citizenry, which now information is moving us into separate worlds that don't share facts. A somewhat informed citizenry that can pass judgment on its representatives, because our democracy is not a direct democracy. The people don't make the laws, but they get to say no. They get to throw people out if they don't like it. So it's predicated on a somewhat educated citizenry with some understanding of what their representatives are doing, and the representatives have to be able to compromise and work things out. And the congressmen I've met are generally really socially skilled. That's how they got to be successful politicians. We're paying them in part to use their social skills to do the log rolling and compromise that it takes to make democracy work. And then, since the 90s, and especially since social media, we're saying, no more of that interpersonal stuff. Don't meet each other. Don't live in Washington. Well, the Republicans started that in the 1990s. Don't even move to Washington. So we're depriving our legislators of the opportunities to use their skills to make the country work. And that's why so little gets done in Washington. It's one of the reasons why so little gets done in Washington in recent decades, except when one party has complete control of everything for a brief time.
Yeah, and now we see a lot of politicians, they go straight to social media, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's like they bypass the other politicians, they bypass traditional media, and they go straight to you. So, recently Trump on his Instagram is like saying this is a witch hunt, like straight. And I just thought that was fascinating that you're coming to me, you're not going through the judicial or going to those people. It's like you're coming straight. And it's almost, I guess it is one big popularity contest now, running for office.
Yeah.
And it's a weird way that it's working. I read a New York Times article a few weeks ago about how Nancy Pelosi was never going to do impeachment and she wasn't strong enough. And then a week later, she's doing it. So it's like...
Well, the facts changed.
Yeah, the facts did change, definitely. But it's like you have who you are and then who people think you are and who the voters think you are and then the funding, and it's all this weird thing.
That's right. So it feels as though like, God reached in and just changed some basic parameters of the universe, and like, things are floating away or coming apart. It's like, imagine, to go back to the soccer game analogy, imagine that there's a long tradition of there's a soccer tournament that's going on for many years, and suddenly, one team or both teams, they just come onto the field and they don't care about the referee. They totally ignore the referee. All they're doing is performing for the stands. So imagine how incoherent it would be if one team is doing that and the other team is not. Like, it wouldn't work. And so I'm not saying that only one team is doing it, but certainly Donald Trump has mastered the art of doing that, of ignoring convention, ignoring law, I would say, and going direct to the demos. So in many ways, this is Plato's fear, this is Madison's fear. We are living it now.
How does this play out, Jonathan, in the next 20 years?
Yeah. How does it play out? So I'll give you two scenarios. Let me start with the optimistic one, and I have to always keep this in mind. So I'm friends with Steven Pinker, cognitive psychologist at Harvard.
I kept thinking of his books when you wrote this up.
As you should. We should all have Steve Pinker's books in mind.
Been here a couple times, yeah.
Good, okay. So, Steve wrote these amazing books, The Better Angels of Our Nature and Enlightenment Now, and he shows how, on measure after measure, life is getting better, and yet people often don't think so. So there's a good chance that he's right about this. And, as I said, it could be, because, he certainly admits there's backsliding. I mean, the 20th century happened, which, from beginning to end was incredible, but there were some problems in the middle, so he doesn't deny that horrible things can happen. 100 years from now, material progress will be vast. Rights and quality of life will probably be better around the world. A lot of things are likely to keep improving, as he says. Democracy, I don't know about. That's one place where I am much more pessimistic. And countries can fail. Countries can stop being democracies. And so I think we just don't know. What I can say with some confidence is two things. One, if current trends continue, if current trends continue, I think the United States is likely to fail as a democracy. But number two, current trends are not going to just continue linearly. So it's very difficult to predict the future. I can't say how we're going to adapt to this. Right now, the trends are very negative, I think, and I see very few positive trends on the horizon. But we've been through terrible times before. More and more people are focusing on this. In the last 2 years, enormous numbers of foundations, donors, researchers, professors. So we're looking at these problems now like never before, and maybe we'll come up with something. I'm not moving my family out of America. I'm not buying land in New Zealand, but
you.